Blended Podcasts. Brought to you by Blended Audio.
What does a healthy, balanced lifestyle consist of? How should you eat? What exercise should you be doing? How many hours of sleep do we really need? Does too much water flush away all your vitamins? Should it be high carb, low fat, or high fat, low carb? The more research you do, the more confusing it gets, because there is so much information out there, and there are so many conflicting opinions. So how are we supposed to know? Stick around to explore the different approaches to health with us, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and let's try to figure out together what the heck being healthy really means. I am your host, Hazel Priscilla, and this is your weekly dose of Feed Me Honesty. As always, welcome back to another episode packed with all the answers to your health-related questions. If you listened to our first episode last month, you will remember today's guest, dietitian Janke Wessels. But if you're tuning in for the first time today, Janke has a master's degree in dietetics and currently practices in Standerton, Mpumalanga. Today we have her back on the show to have a more in-depth discussion about something that seems to have become a bit of a trend over the last few years: plant-based diets. And because there is so much to say about this topic, we've decided to turn it into a two-part episode. Hello Janke, and welcome once again to Feed Me Honesty.
Thank you for inviting me back. It's great to be here.
Let's get straight into it. Before I ask you any other questions, please tell our listeners, in case they don't already know, what exactly it means when you say you follow a plant-based diet.
Well, the definition lies in the word plant-based. A plant-based diet consists of only plant food sources. All animal products are excluded from the diet. We usually refer to either a vegetarian diet, where one does not include food like red meat, poultry or fish. And then we also get a vegan diet. It goes a bit further, where all animal products are excluded. This also in this case, it also excludes food like eggs, milk products. Any milk from an animal is excluded. Any food that contains any ingredient of any animal product, it's also part of the list that's excluded. And I know in some cases, people that follows a vegan diet, they even exclude honey because it comes from bees.
And I know some extreme vegans even exclude avos because it involves exploiting bees in their production. I think the thing people worry about most when they hear the words plant-based diet or consider following one themselves is, where do you get your protein from? Can you please tell us what the best non-animal protein sources are, and is it possible to reach your daily protein intake targets without consuming any meat?
Well, most South Africans eat too much meat or too much animal proteins, and we really don't need to eat meat every day. And we as dietitians, we really try to educate people on the importance to increase the intake of plant proteins. And we have sayings like meatless Mondays and vegetarian Wednesdays, really to try and remind people that you really don't need meat every day. And yes, even though meat and poultry and fish, they are great sources of protein and are very good quality and high quality, you can get easy about 20 grams of protein when you consume 100 grams of meat. It's really a quick and easy protein. But looking at the cardiovascular disease risk and even prevention, we are actually now advised with the newest research to limit meat intake to 500 grams a week. All meat, red meat, fish, chicken, because of the increased risk that then comes with that. So it means if you really space that throughout the week and you calculate it, it comes down to 70 grams of meat per day, which means it's a very small portion, so you will have to go without meat once or 2 times a week. And in South Africa, I mean, if you go to a restaurant, you can easily get a serving of 500 grams of steak. It's very easy. But I think before I start talking too much, let me just get to your question of protein sources, focusing on plant proteins. Good sources include tofu. I don't know if everyone is familiar with that, but it's a white substance. It's made of soya beans and soya products. It's also a very good source of plant proteins, together with lentils, chickpeas, beans, even some grains like oats, bread, especially some breads. The other day I saw a bread in South Africa. It's marketed as a high protein bread, and I was really impressed to see that one slice provides you with 5.8 grams of protein, which is quite good. Then also seeds and nuts, especially almonds and peanut butter and peas, if you look more to the vegetables. So there's really a big variety of plant proteins. With the protein needs to meet it, it's I think here it is important to remember that proteins are made up of building blocks. It feels like I always talk about building blocks. It's maybe because I have little children at home. But we call these building blocks amino acids. And there are 20 types of amino acids. And some of these amino acids the body can make. But there are 9 essential amino acids. And these 9 amino acids must be provided by or through the diet or supplied by the diet. It cannot be made by the body. And we find these 9 essential amino acids in a variety of food. And it's possible to get it in through plant protein sources, even though the plant food, it's not so high in the amino acids, but it's still possible to meet the needs and at the end of the day meet protein needs. I think it's just here important to eat then a variety of plant proteins. If you choose to stick with plant proteins only, make sure you then eat a variety. Eat beans, lentils, grains, actually like we just mentioned, nuts, seeds, soya products, vegetables. If you eat a variety, you can meet protein needs.
And just to add to that list, the superfood spirulina actually contains 57 grams of protein per 100 gram. So if you're worried about protein intake, this is also a very useful plant source. Some people like to add it to their smoothies, but if you don't have time to make a smoothie, you can even just mix a little spirulina powder in water. On to the next question. Now I would like to discuss a few of the pros and cons related to a plant-based diet. I will start. As someone who mainly follows a plant-based diet myself, the biggest pro for me has been better digestion, because indigestion was something I noticeably struggled with more when I was eating meat on a daily basis. And then the biggest con for me, I would say, is bloating. Fruit like apples and pears, veggies like broccoli and legumes like beans and chickpeas, which you naturally eat a lot more of on a plant-based diet, are known to cause you to bloat. And although there are ways around this, like combining your food better and soaking your legumes before you cook them, I generally feel bloated a lot more often on a plant-based diet. What can you add to this pros and cons list from a dietitian's perspective?
Well, starting with the pros, on top of my list will also be improved digestion, like you mentioned. It's mostly because of the higher fiber. It's sometimes difficult for us to meet our fiber needs because we are advised to actually take in quite a lot of fiber each day because of the health benefits. We're talking about anything from 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. And if you really start to calculate your food and the fiber intake or the fiber content in food, it's quite difficult to meet this recommendation. But the moment you switch to a plant-based diet, you increase your intake of mostly fiber food, like beans and lentils and fruit and veg. So it's really beneficial in terms of higher fiber. And I mean, talking about fiber, there's so many health benefits. I won't even go into depth with that. Together with that, also lowering fat in most cases. It will also depend now on the individual and how much oil and other types of, like for instance, I know coconut oil. It's also commonly consumed in the vegan or vegetarian world, but it's generally lower in fat because you exclude animal products. And then for me, other pro will also be, I think it's more towards the economic point of view, but cost-wise, I think you can save a bit of money, or it can be a bit of a cheaper option, not nutrient cheap, but money. You can save a bit of money because when you look, especially in South Africa, at current meat prices, when you substitute it with plant-based proteins, most of the plant-based proteins, it's really not expensive. Talking about your beans and lentils and chickpeas and soya, it's really not expensive products. Yes, I think that's what I will add to your list with pros. With the concerns, I think my concern will be firstly a variety. The moment you exclude all animal products, I'm not just talking meat, if you really go further and you exclude also eggs and dairy, my concern will be the variety. And together then with that, I mean to sustain that eating pattern, so sustainability. And then my concern will be if there's not a big variety of food and you exclude it with poor knowledge. I'm not saying that everyone that's following this diet don't know what they do, but sometimes we do something without really doing proper research, then it can really lead to deficiencies without us really realizing it. And yes, then it can influence bone health and muscle mass or muscle maintenance, especially our lean body mass. It's a bit then of concern. And then also I think a bit more on the practical side is the taste. Sometimes it's more of a challenge to prepare these plant-based proteins still in a tasteful way, because in most cases our meat provide us with quite strong flavors and gravies, so it's very easy to make food taste nice when you use animal proteins. But with plant proteins, it's a bit more of a challenge. And then I think especially in smaller places and smaller towns, the availability, I think you're very limited. Whereas in the cities and the bigger places or places that's more conscious about alternative eating patterns, you will find a bigger variety. But yes, I think that's my list with the concerns.
I definitely agree that those are valid concerns that need to be taken into consideration if you switch to a plant-based diet. Something I also quickly want to add to the con list before we move on is the social aspect. I know when I first switched to eating mainly plant-based foods, social settings start to cause a bit of anxiety, because if someone invites you over and presents you with a meal that they've put a lot of time and effort into, but that is not necessarily in line with your dietary preferences, it is very difficult to navigate the situation because you don't want to offend anyone by not accepting their hospitality. And the same goes for when you're invited to a restaurant that doesn't cater for your specific needs. I mean, you could of course always eat at home and then just join the group for a drink, but I've learned that people don't always let you off the hook so easily, and you can expect to get a lot of questions when you don't order any food or just go for the plain old side salad. Luckily, I have to say you are much more likely to find vegan or vegetarian options on the menu, regardless of where you eat nowadays. And then just to balance out the cons a bit, another big plant-based pro for me is having so many different colors on my plate. I know it might seem like something silly to mention, but having a colorful plate makes me feel very happy, and it definitely makes me enjoy my food more. When it comes to presentation, which is something I really value a lot, it is quite easy to make a plant-based meal look visually appealing. In our Back to Basics episode, we talked about supplementation and basically came to the conclusion that if you're eating a balanced diet and you're not pregnant or an athlete or anything like that, it is not necessary for you to take any supplements. Is this relevant when you're following a plant-based diet as well, or do you in this case need to supplement? I know that in the vegan and vegetarian circles there is a lot of talk about B12 supplementing, for example.
Yes, I will for surely advise supplementation in this group of people, especially for people following a vegan diet, only plant-based proteins, excluding all animal proteins. Then it's for surely advised to consider supplementation, because we are worried about a few micronutrients. It's of concern when all animal products are excluded, things like calcium, iron, zinc, vitamin B12 like you mentioned, because we find it mostly in meat and eggs and milk, also vitamin D. So there are quite a few micronutrients, so we usually advise people then to take a multivitamin mineral, looking at something that provides you with 100% of the recommended daily intake. And then even omega-3 is of concern because we find it mostly in fish. It's an essential fatty acid, and it's anti-inflammatory, so it's really advised to take in enough omega-3. For a general population, we actually advise people to consume fatty fish, things like poachers and salmon and sardines 2 times a week. So if this food is also excluded from the diet, I would really advise a omega-3 supplement to supplement that. What I can maybe just add on is that people must maybe look out also for food products that are enriched or fortified. We see it more and more. Things like cereals and bread and even milk, especially if you make use of a plant type of milk like rice milk or almond milk or coconut milk. Look out that it is maybe enriched with calcium. And something that I just would like to mention here, because this is also really according to individual needs and how the person is currently eating, and it's really different for each person. So I would really advise someone that's, especially if you go from a normal eating pattern towards a more plant-based or a vegan diet, maybe try and see if you can't consult a dietitian. I think a dietitian can really assist you to look at your current eating patterns, your current needs, and especially then advise you what supplementation is needed. Even the type of supplement. We have so many supplements on the market, and sometimes it's important to look at the type of supplement. Also, nutrient interaction. Sometimes we have to consider that also, because it doesn't help you take all of the supplements, but at the end of the day, it's just interacting in a negative way. And yes, so I would say, yes, supplementation is advised. If you are not sure, maybe consult a dietitian on this one, because it also, it's not one size fits all. It's really according how you're currently eating and what your preference is, and then to look into what will fit you.
I am glad you mentioned this, because I think most vegans or vegetarians are scared to consult dietitians due to the fear that they might be bullied into consuming animal products again. If this is you and you've been looking for a professional to consult who wouldn't judge your dietary preferences or try to talk you out of them, Janke has agreed to be of assistance, and you can get hold of her by sending her an email to wesselsjanke@gmail.com. That's wesselsjanke@gmail.com. I'm not going to let myself get into the whole supplement debate right now, but I will say that I recently went to a pharmacy to buy some supplements, and I couldn't believe how many of them there are on the market. I, for one, found it super intimidating and confusing just to try to pick the right one. Let's just leave it at that. I was introduced to a plant-based diet about 3 years ago, and over time I've noticed that there are 4 types of vegans or vegetarians. First, you have your vegan or vegetarian who chooses not to consume meat and or animal products due to the cruelty of the industry and environmental factors. Then you have those who are looking to lose some weight, who just sees this as another diet to follow because they've heard it can help you to lose weight. And then your third group of people are generally those who are doing it for health reasons. There has been a lot of research lately that shows a plant-based diet can reduce your risks of heart disease and certain cancers, as well as diabetes, etc. And then your last group of people are those who are just doing it because it's currently a trend and they need to follow the latest trend. My question is, can you use a plant-based diet as a means to lose weight, or is this not particularly something you would suggest to your patients who want or need to lose a little bit of weight?
I also think it is a current trend, even though I think food, it's like fashion. It comes and goes. It's just coming to the front. It's never really new, especially talking about fad diets and trends in eating patterns. Generally, I think people are becoming more health conscious, and I hope I'm right, but it's a good thing. But on a weight loss point of view, no, I will not advise a patient, someone that has been following a normal diet with all the food groups, to now switch to a plant-based diet. Firstly, because we don't want people to just exclude a food group for no reason at all. It's not sustainable, and I'm just concerned about the variety. And secondly, I do advise patients to increase their intake of plant-based proteins. substitute maybe animal proteins with plant proteins, maybe on certain days or with certain meals. That's really beneficial, and the general population in South Africa we don't consume enough plant-based proteins. We can really increase the intake of that. But to exclude all animal products for weight loss, no, I will not advise someone to do that, especially if we see now the new research where we actually see that cow's milk dairy can actually assist you with weight loss and even weight maintenance. And I think that brings me to my last point, where I strongly feel that weight loss must be a lifestyle adjustment, actually a permanent lifestyle adjustment, because it doesn't help you lose the weight and you just gain it again. And in most cases, we see that the moment someone followed a diet, say for 6 weeks or a couple of days, sometimes it's not even a week, a month, it's really showing us that in most cases the people just gain that weight again and even more than what they've lost. So it must be a lifestyle adjustment, it must be sustainable, and it must fit that person's needs and food preferences. So we must take all of that into consideration. And yes, lastly, I think it's part of this point, but losing weight is actually, it comes down to total energy intake. Sometimes I get the sense that people are searching for this special diet or special food or special ingredient that will just magically help them to lose weight, but we still didn't find it. And it still comes back to cutting kilojoules, cutting total energy intake, and then you lose weight. And I think that's why some people also benefit from a plant-based diet, because they're cutting kilojoules, they are cutting energy intake, and then they do lose weight. Yes, so from my point of view, I will not advise someone to just switch to a different type of diet for weight loss, because for me, it must be sustainable.
I completely agree. It's like when you decide you're not going to eat chocolate and suddenly chocolate is the only thing you can think of. And on that sweet note, I think that is all we have time for today. But like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a 2-part episode, so be sure to tune in again next week when we will be taking off right where we left off today. Janke, thank you so much for your input so far. I really look forward to continuing this discussion with you next week. Have a balanced week, and remember to be kind to yourself so that you can be kind to others too. Feed Me Honesty is a South African lifestyle podcast hosted by Hazel Priscilla and produced with the generous assistance of Blended Podcasts, brought to you by Blended Audio.